You know, if you've enjoyed even a passing acquaintance with Jay McInerney's work, you've been forced to entertain the strong suspicion that he's just had a whole lot more fun than you have. Remember the wildest, most epic, out-of-control, licentious party that you have ever attended? That's a dull Tuesday night for Jay. I mean, the man is the author of 2 separate collections of essays on wine, both of which are excellent, both of which bear witness to the unflagging commitment he has to research, and more research. When it comes to creating characters, no one conjures the rueful and hungover but heroically game party animal the way Jay McInerney can. And this has to be the first time that these words have ever been uttered in the hallowed halls of Griffin 3. But let me just state, here and now, that no one in the history of American literature has written so persuasively and so compellingly on the subject of cocaine use. But Jay McInerney is more than just our poet laureate of the Sybaritic, although God knows he's been that for over a generation now. For those of you who expect at least a little biographical information in your introductions, our guest tonight is the author of, besides those 2 collections of essays on wine, a collection of stories, 7 novels, the first of which was cited by no less an authority than Time magazine as one of 9 generation-defining novels of the 20th century. Think about that. One of 9 generation-defining novels of the 20th century. What have you been doing lately? It's a measure of Jay's talent for titles that so many of his titles can stand in for nearly his entire oeuvre. And I thought if Jay was coming here tonight, he should hear somebody say, oeuvre. These are some of Jay's titles. They pretty much tell you all you need to know. Bright Lights, Big City. A Hedonist in the Cellar. It's 6 a.m., do you know where you are? The Debutante's Return. Sleeping with Pigs. Invisible Fences. The Good Life. Brightness Falls. Simple Gifts. And finally, of course, The Last Bachelor. Jay has Tom Wolfe's comic flair when it comes to the broad-stroke demolition of social mores. One of his narrators announces, quote, "Then we moved to New York," which is to monogamy what the channel changer is to linear narrative. Another says of a long-term bachelor, quote, "He'd been eligible for so long he ceased to be plausible." But Jay McInerney's always been more ambitious and more elegiac than Wolfe. More heartfelt, though God knows that's not very hard. More acutely observant, and more dedicated to honoring the emotional intricacies of his central characters. Despite having invented an entire subgenre of American fiction indelibly linked to the 80s and 80s culture, Jay's gifts as a writer are pretty old-fashioned in the canonical and best sense of the term. His work immediately brings to mind John O'Hara's and Irwin Shaw's fiction, especially when it comes to their preoccupations with money and social mobility and intensities and attenuations of passion. But the project of his work might be even better compared to Flaubert's or F. Scott Fitzgerald's. Like the latter, Jay McInerney's subject has been, by and large, privileged upper-crust America which is to say he's particularly astute at rendering multiple forms of self-delusion: arrested development, maddening entitlement, appalling parochialism, touching idealism, and benign and privileged neglect. Which is also to say that Jay writes about class, which is a subject that's so taboo in American discourse that we would even rather talk about race than face it. Which is also to say that Jay's work is only going to become more important in the difficult years to come. Because Jay's protagonists, like Fitzgerald's, are often only half insiders. And that slight sense of unease, of exile, makes all the difference. Though they register that in many ways they're simply embroidery on the standard pattern. Even so, they can't quite overcome the poignancy of their desire to believe in their own secret aristocracy. And to ensure that they belong, they're happy to indulge in the kind of Darwinism that capitalism is elsewhere enacting. And having done so, they stand amazed and dismayed by themselves. Jay McInerney is labeled a romantic because he never ceases to be compelled by those moments in which we put forward our most shining selves and those moments in which we fall so short of that ideal. He continually reminds us of the necessity that we teach ourselves through our own mistakes. And he never loses sight of Flannery O'Connor's insight that writing is the action of grace in territory held by the devil. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most famous writers you're ever going to meet, Jay McInerney.
Thank you, Jim. You think I could get a copy of that later? I wondered where it was going for a little while, and I really liked the turn. The turn in the after the bard of cocaine part. I'm going to read from my very first published story, which later became my very first published novel. Bright Lights, Big City. At the time, the story, which was published in the Paris Review, was called "It's 6 a.m., Do You Know Where You Are?" I actually had submitted a story to George Plimpton at the Paris Review, and I was thrilled one day I was at Syracuse at graduate school, and I got a call, and this fluty, a famous voice asked me, claimed to be George Plimpton, and said that he liked my story very much, but did I want to show them anything else before they rendered their judgment? And so I went through all of everything that night. I went through pretty much everything I'd ever written, and I realized it was all derivative and terrible, except that there was a scrap of paper in my desk that dated back to a night when I had been out at a nightclub in New York, and had come home about 4 or 5 a.m., and I had scribbled down what I had overheard myself saying in the bathroom of the nightclub. You're not the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning. And this short paragraph seemed to be about the only authentic thing that I could find in my drawer, and so pretty much that night I sat down and I wrote a 10-page story and sent it to George Plimpton, and it became my first published story. And this is just, I'm just going to read the first few pages. You're not the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning, but here you are. And you can't say that the terrain is entirely unfamiliar, although the details are a little fuzzy. You're at a nightclub talking to a girl with a shaved head. The club is either the Bimbo Box or the Lizard Lounge. It might all come a little clearer if you could just slip into the bathroom and do a little more Bolivia marching powder. Then again, it might not. There is a small voice inside of you insisting that this epidemic lack of clarity is the result of too much of that already. But you're not yet willing to listen to that voice. The night has already turned on that imperceptible pivot where 2 a.m. becomes 6 a.m. You know that moment has come and gone, though you're not yet willing to concede that you have crossed the line beyond which all is gratuitous damage and the palsy of unraveled nerve endings. Somewhere back there it was possible to cut your losses, but you rode past that moment on a comet trail of white powder, and now you are trying to hang on to the rush. Your brain at this moment is composed of brigades of tiny Bolivian soldiers. They are tired and hungry from their long march through the night. There are holes in their boots. They need to be fed. They need the Bolivian marching powder. Something vaguely tribal about this scene, pendulous jewelry, face paint, ceremonial headgear, and hairstyles. You feel that there's also a certain Latin theme, which is more than the fading buzz of marimbas in your brain. You are leaning back against a post which may or may not be structural with regard to the building, but nonetheless feels essential for the maintenance of an upright position. The bald girl is saying this used to be a good place to come before the assholes discovered it. You do not want to be talking to this bald girl or even listening to her, which is all you're doing, but you don't have your barge pole handy, and just at the moment, you don't want to test the powers of speech or locomotion. How did you get here? It was your friend, Tad Allagash, who powered you in here, and now he has disappeared. Tad is the kind of guy who certainly would be at a place like this at this time of the morning. He is either your best self or your worst self. You're not sure which. Earlier in the evening, it seemed clear that he was your best self. You started on the Upper East Side with champagne and unlimited prospects, strictly observing the Allagash rule of perpetual motion, 1 drink per stop. Tad's mission in life is to have more fun than anyone else in New York City, and this involves a lot of moving around, since there's always the likelihood that where you aren't is more fun than where you are. You're awed by this strict refusal to acknowledge any goal higher than the pursuit of pleasure. You want to be like that. You also think he's shallow and dangerous. His friends are all rich and spoiled, like the cousin from Memphis you met earlier in the evening who refused to accompany you below 14th Street because he said he didn't have a low-life visa. This cousin had a girlfriend with cheekbones to break your heart, and you knew she was the real thing when she never once acknowledged your presence. She possessed secrets about islands, about horses, about French pronunciation that you would never know. You have traveled from the course in the course of the night from the meticulous to the slime. The girl with the shaved head has a scar tattooed on her scalp that looks like a long sutured gash. You tell her it is very realistic. She takes this as a compliment and thanks you. You meant as opposed to romantic. I could use one of those right over my heart, you say. You want, I can give you the name of the guy that did it, she said. You'd be surprised how cheap. You don't tell her that nothing would surprise you now. Her voice, for instance, which is like the New Jersey state anthem played through an electric shaver. The bald girl is emblematic of the problem. What the problem is that for some reason you think you're going to meet the kind of girl who is not the kind of girl who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning. When you meet her, you're going to tell her that what you really want is a house in the country with a garden. New York, the club scene, bald women, you're tired of all that. Your presence here is only a matter of conducting an experiment in limits, reminding yourself of what you aren't. You see yourself as the kind of guy who wakes up early on Sunday morning and steps out to pick up the Times and croissant. You take a cue from the arts and leisure section and decide to check out some exhibition. costumes of the Habsburg court at the Met, say, or Japanese lacquerware of the Muromachi period at the Asia Society. Maybe you will call that woman you met at the publishing party Friday night, the party you did not get sloppy drunk at, an editor at a famous publishing house, even though she looks like a fashion model. See if she wants to check out the exhibition and maybe do an early dinner. You will wait until 11 a.m. to call her because, unlike you, she may not be an early riser. She may have been out a little late, at a nightclub, say. And it occurs to you that there might be time for a couple of sets of tennis before the museum. You wonder if she plays, but then, of course, she would. When you meet the girl who wouldn't, etc., you will tell her that you were slumming, visiting your own 6 a.m. Lower East Side of the soul on a lark, stepping nimbly between the piles of garbage to the marimba rhythms in your head. On the other hand, any beautiful girl would help you stave off this creeping sense of mortality. You remember the Bolivian marching powder and realize you're not down yet. But first you have to get rid of this bald girl because she's doing bad things to your mood. That is the first few pages of its 6 a.m. Do You Know Where You Are, which later became Bright Lights Big City. My editor, Gary Fisketjon, who will be on the panel with me later, told me when I was in the middle of writing Bright Lights Big City that he certainly hoped that I wasn't trying to write an entire novel in the second person, and that it would be a terrible mistake, and I'm sure he was right, but I persisted. It was a balancing act, and I frankly would not recommend the second person as the most versatile of narrative stances, but I don't know, I just tell me I shouldn't do something and I'm there, so that was why I stuck with it probably. I just thought I'd read a short piece from probably my least successful novel critically and in the popular imagination, but it started out as a short story in the New Yorker, which I reprinted in my latest book, How It Ended, which is all of my short stories, or all of the ones that we decided were still fit to print. And I don't know, I have a soft spot for it, and I'm just going to read the first couple of pages. It is about another aspiring writer, although in this case he is a writer reduced to writing celebrity profiles for a woman's magazine, although he has higher aspirations, and his girlfriend is a fashion model. And the story is called Philomena. The name of the party is the party you've been to 600 times already. Everybody is here. All of your friends, my girlfriend Philomena states, in what can only be described as a tart, positively citric manner. Seems to me that they are her friends, that she is the reason we are part of this fabulous gala, which takes place in the waiting room of Grand Central Station, evicting dozens of homeless people for the night. We are supposedly on hand for the benefit of a disease, but we were comped, so is everyone else we know. I'm sick of all this pointless glamour, my glamorous girlfriend says. I want the simple life. This has become a theme. Weariness with metropolitan life in all of its colonoscopic intricacy. I wonder if her ennui is somehow related to that other unstated domestic theme, infrequency of sex. We are accosted by Belinda, the popular transvestite, who I am nearly certain is a friend of my girlfriend's as opposed to a friend of mine. Belinda is with an actual woman, an ageless one with striking dark eyebrows and buzz-cut white hair, who is always here at the party and whom I'm always seem to recognize, and whose name is, "Hi, how are you? Good to see you." All the women lately have either 3 names or just one, even the impersonators. "Oh, God, hide me," says the woman whose name I always forget. That's Tommy Kroger. I had a bad date with him about 5,000 years ago. Did you sleep with him? Philomena asks, raising one of her perfectly defined eyebrows, which looks like a crow in flight in the far distance of a painting by Van Gogh. God, I can't remember, she says. If you can't remember, then you did, says Belinda. That's the rule. Ah, so that's the rule. Later, as we are undressing for bed, Philomena announces preemptively that she is exhausted. No nookie for you, buckaroo. This comes in little sections, and they're all titled. And this section is called At Long Last Sex. The narrator, the day after the party, is helping Philomena choose the outfits for her trip. A versatile taupe suit from Jill Sander, a Versace jacket and ripped jeans for the plane, a fetching little sheath from Nicole Miller for evening, plus an extra pair of ripped and faded jeans, plus 3 immaculate white t-shirts. If he were more attentive, the narrator might pick up certain clues from the packing or from her behavior that this trip is more than it has been represented to be. But he is not suspicious by nature, and his powers of observation are swamped by a surge of hormones. When, after trying on the sheath, she slips out of it and asks him to fetch some panties from her dainties drawer, he is overcome with desire for the taut, tawny flesh beneath her teddy. Please, he pleads, just a little. He reminds her that it has been 9 days, 5 hours, and 36 minutes, and they're not even married yet. No, we're not. Are we? She says. Oh dear. A tactical mistake. Matrimony is a sore point. Luckily, the subject is not pursued, but still she makes him kneel and beg for it. Craven, genuflective begging ensues. Heartfelt and genuine. Please, please, he says. He will do anything. He will bark like any species of dog she can name, even roll over if necessary. Finally, she peels off the teddy and lies back on the bed like Manet's Olympia, ripe and haughty, a bored odalisque. She is a woman whose image is expensively employed to arouse desire in conjunction with certain consumer goods. Fast, she commands, and no sweating. The narrator takes what he can get, a grateful consumer. That's just the first 2 pages, but how it ended is my latest book, which is a collection of my short stories. I'm instructed to tell you that that it's available signed by me in the bookstore on Water Street. I forget what the bookstore is called now, but apparently it's the only one now, right? we used to have 2 bookstores here. We had dueling bookstores on Spring Street. It was pretty great. I expect the next time I come back here there won't be any bookstores, but anyway, it's nice to be here. This is the first time I've ever read at Williams, and I graduated quite a long time ago. So thank you for having me. I'm going to read a final piece from my last novel, The Good Life. It is a book that was written about the aftermath of September 11th in New York City. It is a book that it's kind of a follow-up to a previous novel called Brightness Falls, in which I wrote about a then young couple trying to conquer New York named Russell and Corinne Calloway. And in some ways, I think it remains my favorite of my novels. It was my 4th book. And this couple, Russell and Corinne, are kind of alter egos in a sense. I sort of feel like, if I had, say, become an editor instead of a writer, which might very well have happened, if I had married my college sweetheart instead of getting married and divorced quite a number of times, then this might be my life. And I've always sort of had this sort of, what Philip Roth calls this counter life kind of in view. And this couple, Russell and Corinne, have kind of been my counter life. And so in the wake of September 11th, after deciding, like many wiser people, that fiction was irrelevant and I would never write it again, I realized that that was kind of stupid and that fiction was maybe more necessary than ever. And eventually, I thought it'd be interesting to write about this couple as they experienced the aftermath of 9/11. Unfortunately, the novel starts on September 10th, and the passage I'm about to read actually is September 10th, right before the world changed. Corinne is, at this point in her life, an aspiring screenwriter. And she has written a screenplay based on Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter, which she is trying to sell. And she and Russell have a dinner party at which one of the guests is a noted film director. And he manages to convince her to come meet him for a drink, with the understanding that they will talk about the screenplay. So I think that's the background that you might need. Evelyn's gave every appearance of being dive, so drab as to make some visitors nostalgic for a lost Greenwich village. I thought this kind of place was extinct, you might say, if on a whim, or in order to get out of the rain, you had descended 8 steps down the sidewalk and pushed through the door, squeezing past the regulars, slouched on the dull, pitted mahogany bar, till you reached the dining room, which was the length of a subway car and slightly wider. At 9 o'clock, half of the tables would be divvied up between tourists and aging bohemians who remembered the proprietress as an off-Broadway diva, and who in their time had been drawn here by the legend of the abstract expressionists and beat poets who were said to have lurched about the premises for a season or two before settling on the Cedar Tavern. No photos or memorabilia commemorated this golden age. The walls were bare except for a few land and seascapes, possibly Italian, of the kind purchased on a forgotten holiday. The very name for Corinne conjured a lost era of half-remembered night crawls and pre-dawn revelry, the riotous codas of book parties and gallery openings and movie premieres, the fussy preludes to a dozen youthful hangovers. Surprised as she had been to get the phone call and by the notion of a post-midnight script meeting, she was nearly as surprised by the venue. She never would have come out if Russell hadn't encouraged her. It was ridiculous, really, although kind of a typical Hollywood power play, and if Corinne had had a slightly higher opinion of herself, she might have suspected it was a come-on. But Cody Earhart pretty much had his pick of gorgeous young actresses, not to mention Corinne's vixenish sister, who pointedly had not been invited to come along. Anyway, Russell had said, what could it hurt, and speculated that maybe it was less about the script and more about Cody needing some feminine comfort and counsel. By 1:30, the tourists and the diners were long gone, replaced by the vampires, many of whom, she imagined, might well have remained in place since she last set foot here 7 or 8 years ago. The restaurant people just getting off their shifts, the line chefs and managers, the musicians and the maid guys and the character actors who specialized in playing maid guys, along with the kinds of directors and writers who had not yet been to rehab or who were in between visits to rehab and wanted to get down, sometimes in the company of A-list actors, without fear of reading about it in the gossip columns the next day. All of them waiting for the Duke, a vaguely reptilian-looking fellow with slicked-back silver hair. She couldn't remember if Russell had discovered his service first, or maybe it was Washington, but the packages that he dealt not so very discreetly had extended countless evenings well past natural legal limits. Some of the gossip columnists were here too in an unofficial capacity. Whatever happened at Evelyn's was off the record. It was like one of those watering holes on the savannah at which the zebras drank unmolested beside the lions. Evelyn would have banned anyone who had molested a fellow drinker or committed any untoward behavior to print. Corinne remembered that Monday nights were always busy. The Evelyn's crowd rested up over the weekend, Friday and Saturday being amateur nights. Evelyn herself, a big overflowing woman with chipmunk cheeks, who was never seen to move from her spot, sat lumpishly at a table in the back with a few haggard-looking friends. Cody was sitting at her table. He got up and chose a table in the back room, holding out a seat for her. She was aware of Erhard's reputation as a pussy hound. He'd been married twice, both times to actresses, although this hadn't prevented him from engaging in more or less publicized affairs. So here they were, meeting at a dive after midnight, with Erhard flagging down an entirely unnecessary drink. "I've always heard you two were the perfect couple," he said. "You and Russell, Ivy League prince and princess." "There's no such thing as a perfect couple," she said. "My point exactly." "Ah, so that was your point," she said. "I was wondering." "Marriage is difficult," he said. The arrival of the waitress seemed to cheer him. He waved the hovering figure in like one of those guys with flashlights beckoning a 747 forward on the runway, watching his drink as it was lowered to the table as if to make sure it didn't fly away. "She's a professional," he said after she left. "Who, the waitress?" "She does parties after hours for $500 an hour." "How is she?" Corinne asked. "Oh, I'm not into that kind of thing, though I've been to some of the parties." "I hear you're into leading ladies," Corinne said. "To direct an actress," Cody said, "you have to put her on a pedestal. Make her into a goddess. You have to fall in love with her a little so the audience will fall in love with her a lot. It's what you might call an occupational hazard." Well, at least you're well compensated for it." "Some of those crazy bitches," Cody said, "not nearly well enough." Erhard had a vast repertoire of scowls and facial tics with which he carried on his own side of the conversation when forced to dam the torrent of his own speech and listen, unlike most of the directors of his generation who seemed to believe that beards conferred on them a certain intellectual gravity. He'd always been clean-shaven, and thus unable to mask his impatience with the generally misguided and imprecise opinions of his interlocutors. "So, Jim says you're interested in talking about the heart of the matter," she said. "What, already we're talking business? As opposed to what?" He sighed, threw his arms over the back of his chair, assuming the lecture position. "You know, Graham Greene divided his fictional output into two categories," he said, one of which he called entertainments. And the story that eventually became the heart of the matter was originally conceived as one of those, a kind of suspense puzzle, this upside-down procedural in which the crime and the criminal were known, and the mystery lay in identifying the detective who was pursuing him. And of course, you've got the skeleton of that structure in the novel as written. Wilson, the not-so-secretive operative spying for the Home Office on poor old Africa hand Scobie. But eventually old Graham decided to go in a different route and write a novel with all the complexity and moral ambiguity that the word implied for him, which is a long way of saying that the heart of the matter doesn't exactly qualify as the kind of entertainment that plays in Peoria. Not exactly boy meets girl, loses girl, gets girl back. Corinne tried to model her face into that of a good student absorbing instruction, although she was familiar with the contents of this speech. "Well, neither are any of your films," she said. "Who was it," Cody asked, "who described the three-act structure as boy meets girl, boy and girl get into pickle, boy gets pickle into girl?" "I don't know. You?" she said. She was beginning to wonder about the agenda here. What exactly were they doing? "Okay," he said, after a revivifying swallow of his drink. "I've been thinking about this book for years. I love the idea, but I've got some questions right from the start. Let's just put aside the whole Catholicism can of worms for a moment. We've got Scobie, the honest politician in a corrupt colonial African hellhole, too honest to be trusted by his careerist drone peers, and his wife Louise, a nag and a drag whom he's too decent or too passive to shed himself of. Do you think he loves her? He loves her in a way, she said. You're equivocating, he said, waving to Abel Farrar across the room. Well, he pities her. Exactly. The problem I have is if you make her too pathetic, which I think Green does, and as I say, you've been incredibly faithful to the master here, then you eventually lose patience with Scobie. Instead of being noble, he just looks like a fucking masochist. And if you make her too sympathetic, of course, then you tip the balance of sympathy away from him when he starts to fuck the little shipwrecked girl. Corinne's sympathy had always been with Scobie, whose nobility broke her heart. That's what made her want to do this. His fierce, unforgiving morality, his refusal to put his own needs or desires first, an honest policeman forced to compromise his honesty for the sake of his wife's happiness, trapped between two women, trying impossibly to do right by both of them, and finally acknowledging the impossibility. There were times, she said, writing the script, when I measured Russell against Scobie and almost hated him. Russell, I mean. Why was she saying this, she wondered, looking at the residue of her most recent glass of wine, remembering suddenly that the screenplay had been Russell's idea. He was the one who suggested it to her, but she definitely had Cody's attention. He'd stopped squirming in his seat and was leaning forward to listen. Because I couldn't imagine him, Russell, in the same situation, being as tortured as Scobie, she said. True, he'd been unfaithful to his wife, but he hated himself for it and finally killed himself because he couldn't bear to let either one of them down. No, Cody said. He killed himself because he committed a mortal sin. It's all about his relationship with God, a Catholic God. I've got some real problems with Scobie's Catholicism, but it's crucial. The women are just place markers, ciphers, empty vessels of neediness. Scobie is, don't insult Scobie, she said. I love Scobie. But you love him, Cody said, because his erotic map, if you can even call it that, is essentially female. He's a chick. He needs to be loved. He needs to be depended on. It's the dependence of the two women that binds him to them, his need to be needed. Their essence is irrelevant. That's a pretty sexist reading, she said. Oh, please. And here I was beginning to think you had an original mind. I'm not a knee-jerk feminist, she said, and I don't have much use for either of the women. Exactly, Cody said. The women are black holes of neediness. She wasn't sure whose point had been won here. He noted her confusion. What I'm saying is that this is actually a fairly special case. Scobie doesn't love the way most men love, and he doesn't cheat the way most men cheat. Why do most men cheat? She asked. I'm curious. Why ask me? Because you're such a perceptive observer of human nature, and you're a man. Because, Cody said, we yearn for the unknown. You mean strange pussy, she said. If you will. Because men are romantics. Scobie's not. He's a realist. Don't laugh. You think I'm kidding? How do you define romantic? Corinne asked. Unrealistic expectations, he said, a yearning for the infinite, dissatisfaction with the actual being the familiar, the body of the woman you've already slept with. When you fuck a strange woman, you're searching the void for meaning. Oh, please. Surely you'll admit, he said, that women are the realists. Let me give you an example. Right now, I have a yearning for a bottle of Burgundy. Long ago, back in, probably 1993, I had a bottle of 71 La Tâche, and I've been trying to capture that bliss ever since. I've swilled dozens, nay, hundreds of bottles of similar stuff in the last decade and paid thousands and thousands of dollars to the privilege, and not only have I never recaptured the glory of that experience, most of this stuff tasted like rot gut. Thin and bitter and ungiving, the Venus equivalent of Green's portrait of Louise. But the next time I'm faced with the wine list, I'll order Burgundy, hope triumphing over bitter experience, still seeking that primal and quite possibly illusory ecstasy of the 71 La Tâche. I think I know exactly what you mean, Corinne said. The last time Russell asked me how I was feeling was 1993, but I keep talking to him anyway, hoping to recapture that experience. How about a bottle of wine, he said. That's about the last thing I need. She looked at her watch. I have 2 kids at home. I have to get up at 7. Don't hide behind that maternal thing. Trying to attract service, he waved both arms over his head. She'd already had more to drink tonight than she had in years, but she was sort of enjoying this, partly because she was drunk. And how often did she get a chance to get drunk with a fucking legend? On the other hand, she didn't want to get so shit-faced that she'd find herself in an awkward situation. He excused himself to go to the men's room. When he finally returned, he pulled his chair up directly beside hers and threw his arm around her, exploring with his hand. Thanks. That's my left breast, she said. I've been looking for it all night. If I said yes, right now, would you go home with me and the waitress? She tried to gauge whether this was a joke. His gaze was glassy and intense through the thick frames of his glasses. I thought you weren't into that kind of thing. Okay, he said, I lied. You're serious? He nodded slowly. You're saying if I fuck you and the waitress, you'll direct my screenplay? That, he said, appears to be what I'm saying. What's to prevent you from changing your mind in the morning? I won't. I give you my word, right here. Flattered as I am, she said, I don't believe you'd base your decision on whether or not I fucked you. And if you did, I could hardly trust your judgment, could I? Ah, Corinne, you underestimate your own attractions. I think you've got me mixed up with my younger sister, she said. No, her attractions are very superficial, he said. I know, I've been there. Well, you must feel very special. It would be interesting, he said, if I had an option check here in my pocket, just to see if you'd be tempted. We'll never know, will we, she said. I enjoy posing these moral dilemmas, he said. And are they often successful? I'm usually disappointed, he said, to discover how easily and cheaply people will sell their souls. I actually admire your integrity. So that was a hypothetical, she said, throwing him a rope. It might have been, he said, not quite deigning to take it. Good save, she thought. She wasn't entirely certain how serious any of this had been. Directors as a class were congenitally manipulative, and Earhart was obviously a real mindfucker. But somehow she wasn't all that offended. Did you get Jim to call me over here just so you could hit on me? She asked, genuinely curious. In a strictly theoretical sense, she found the idea kind of amazing. He paused to consider this and then shrugged. Motives are usually mixed, he said. Don't you think? Riding home in the cab, she decided that she was more flattered than offended. It seemed to have been a very long time since she had seen herself as an object of desire. The night before, after she was in bed, she'd felt a stirring of the old impulse, which had been dormant for many months, if not years. She'd put down her book and rolled on her side, stroking Russell's hip. He'd grunted appreciatively, but when, after a few moments, he failed to put down his manuscript, she retreated to her own side of the bed. Sex had become a yawning chasm between them. Once upon a time, they'd had the freedom of each other's bodies, knowledge that had long since been lost along the way. Like all married couples of long duration, they'd experienced the ebb and flow of physical intimacy. Though by now, the tide had been out so long, she'd begun to doubt its return. After all this time, she felt awkward and self-conscious, and she didn't know how to return her body to him. Every sexless day that passed made it more difficult to resume the old intimacy. At one time, before the kids came along, they'd had sex every morning, a routine established after they'd found themselves too tired at night. She sensed acutely that it was her own fault. From the time she'd been pregnant, she hadn't wanted to be touched, and she definitely hadn't wanted to be touched after the children were born, feeling defective in the wake of their premature birth. Why hadn't she been able to hold them longer? Or rather, it wasn't that she didn't want to be touched, it was that she hadn't wanted to be fucked, which was to Russell the point of touching. Physical affection was, in his mind, foreplay. He didn't seem to have any use for the sort of tenderness that didn't lead directly to orgasm. And this fact made her more reluctant, more resentful. She felt herself tensing up whenever he stroked her arm or kissed her ear, because she knew that these gestures were not ends in themselves, and he in time had started to withhold them. Who knows, she thought as she paid the driver and climbed out, almost tripping as her heel slipped from the curve, pausing to look up at the huge monoliths looming above her. After all this time, he may have stopped wanting me. It occurred to her that she wasn't growing any younger. She was still thin. Her tits were still more or less in place, thank God, not least because there wasn't that much of them. But she was almost 42. What if she started wanting him again, only to discover that he no longer wanted her? She had watched him last night, as if from a great distance, lying on his back on the far side of the bed, his manuscript hovering above his face. It all seemed so sad and foolish. Lying 2 feet away from her husband and wanting him in the old way, she'd felt as shy as a virgin. The white sheet between them, like a blank page she couldn't find the words to fill. That's all. Thank you.